Hey friend, welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Watercolor Flowers. In this video, I am covering so much. I'm going to be starting with teaching you how to sketch basic flowers, sketching basic leaves, how to do basic petal shapes with watercolor, and how to do basic leaf shapes with watercolor. And then I'm covering 3 specific flowers: anemone flower, delphinium, and iris for a trumpet-shaped flower, star-shaped flower, and spear-shaped flower. And we are also covering floral composition and color mixing. So this is a very, very in-depth, large class on floral watercolor for beginners. So before we dive into the video, if you watch this whole thing and you're like, I want quick reference videos, I am splicing up this entire long video into chapters based on all of those things that I mentioned. So you can go to my profile and check out my floral watercolor playlist, where you'll find each individual chapter. This is the full length tutorial with all of those chapters in it. Also, if you're brand spanking new to watercolor, or you just need help with the basic techniques, the foundations of watercolor, check out my complete beginner's guide to watercolor. This is the complete beginner's guide to watercolor flowers. Make sure you check out that video. We'll link it in this video and below so you can check it out. That is also a really good one. Will help you with wet and wet technique, wet and dry, color mixing, all of the things. But for now, let's dive into the complete beginner's guide to watercolor flowers. Okay, so in this lesson, I'm going to be teaching you how to sketch a basic flower, because whether you're painting or illustrating with a pen, understanding basic shapes of a flower and how to actually sketch one is going to be so helpful. I have a bunch of tutorials on sketching basic flowers on my YouTube channel and on my Patreon, but in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to sketch the basic oval flower. So I'm gonna grab my layout bond paper. This is just for demonstration, but if you're sketching before painting on top, make sure you sketch super duper lightly on your watercolor paper so that you don't see your sketch through the transparency of the watercolor. And I'm gonna do this in pen so that you can see. So I'm gonna yeah. All right, so I'm gonna blow your mind. So this is just for the demonstration, but this is a koi coloring brush pen from Sakura. And with every flower, whatever type of flower, if it's a trumpet-shaped flower, bell-shaped, sphere-shaped, star-shaped, I'll talk about the different shapes in a second, I always go for assessing what its basic shape is. So if it's a daffodil, for example, we have a trumpet shape on top and then a circle or spherical shape for the bottom petals. If we are doing a peony or an anemone that's more closed, then we are doing an oval or a spherical shape. Difficult to say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a C curve for my stem. That's going to inform where all of my petals are coming back to. And for your sketch, you're going to start super light, and I'm going to do this with red to show this as like a guide. This is your guide. I'm going to start at the top of that C curve with an oval. When I come back down to that, I'm going to just kind of loop out for more ovals. And the lower, flatter ones are just the tops of the petals showing. And you can do this for days. Like, you can continue to do that for days and days. And then your actual sketch, which I'll do in black marker, would go on top of that. So we've got a petal showing here. So I'm going to pull this out here with just this cloud puffy texture for the tops of my petals. And then maybe we've got one coming in back here and here. And obviously the red parts are what you sketched super lightly in pencil, so you can erase that and actually see what you're doing. But here's what it looks like. You've got your C curve, you've done your ovals, and you're following those ovals as your guide. Just want to show you so you can see more clearly. But basically what those ovals are doing is showing you exactly where you should be placing some petals, because they're all pointing back to that point on the flower where the stem meets the bulb of the flower, or where the stamen is. So you want to make sure that no matter what type of flower you are sketching, painting, whatever it is, whether you're painting realistic or loose style, you want to make sure that all of the petals are pointing back to that spot where they would be growing out of the stem. And so here's what it looks like without the guides underneath. Another fun sketch to do, and we can do, where we have it more open. So if your ovals are a bit longer, skinnier in the front, shorter and fatter in the background, you can show something that's a bit more, we're right at eye level with these front facing petals, and we're just seeing the top edge of the petal right here. And then maybe these petals are falling out, and these are the ones in the back. And then you've got your bulb right there in the center. So you've got petals that are flatter and longer. And then you see the stamen and the bulb of the flower a little bit more open. Like so, cute little cherry blossom type flower. Okay, so another basic sketch or basic shape for a flower. If you're wanting to learn like a trumpet shaped flower, I did this sketch study of a daffodil on my Patreon channel. Make sure you check it out. But like I said, we're starting with a trumpet shape and a circle for the rest of our petals. So any flower can be dissected into a basic shape. So let me show you a star-shaped flower. This will be for when you're viewing a flower straight on. That's like a poppy, anemone. So you could start with sketching a circle or not sketching a circle, totally up to you. And then we're gonna do our star around it. So I'm gonna do this kind of light so you can get an idea of where your petals are gonna go. Again, this would be super duper light with a pencil, like so. And then we can center that a little bit better. And then once your sketch is done, these triangles become petals, and all I'm doing is C curve, parentheses on the outside, or S curve, so you can do an S curve. If you do an S curve on one side, make sure you do it on the other so it's kind of mirrored. And then I'm just adding these like little cloud bumps. In whatever direction those cloud bumps come down toward, like obviously this end of that little cloud is pointing or curving this way. So I'm going to pull that down like that. And then this one is the opposite, so it's mirrored. And then this becomes our center with stamen. S curve, little bumps, little C curves. Like so. Some of these are a little too skinny, so you can add a little width to fill it in. like that. So there you have your anemone. You know, without the star, we have our circle for our bulb, kind of make it more like a disc. And you've got your star shape. So we're gonna whoosh. This one got a little fat. That's why it's so good to sketch your guide first, because some of the petals can get a little too crowded. But then we're just gonna fill in some of the white space so it feels more even and planned. But overall, the basic shape of this open petal, straight on view flower, and an anemone, a peony, whatever, is a star shape and smudgy. Now we're going to do a trumpet or bell-shaped flower. So, you know, you could do daffodil. There's morning glory is a great example. That's a really trumpety looking flower. And I have an example of how to sketch and paint one of those in my book, Everyday Watercolor Flowers. But for this one, we are going to sketch, or I'm going to show you how to sketch an iris. So for your iris, trumpet-shaped flower, I also like to think of it kind of like a skirt. So you've got like a ballet skirt or something on the bottom and on the top. So here is my midpoint of the flower. We're just gonna have that right there. And the top is kind of like a fountain or the opening of a trumpet. So we can come in here and just do a C-curve and a C-curve, try and mirror those. And then the bottom is more trumpety shape. This is like a megaphone, and then this is like a bell. So we've got an S curve over here, an S curve over here. And there's other bell-like shapes poking out behind that. So then illustrating that on top, iris petals are really ruffly like a skirt. So we're gonna come in and just kind of give it these ruffles. And then like the anemone flower, I'm gonna give it some C-curves at the top. And then these are poking out behind. You can come in and back out. And then same thing up top, we've got ruffles. We're following that basic shape of the trumpet. Maybe there's some back here falling away, but they're all kind of just spilling out of the top like that. And then we have the stamen kind of right here, which is kind of like a long tongue on the iris. All right, last but not least, we're gonna be doing a cone-shaped flower. You can do this like we did the ovals in the first exercise, or if you want a more distinct oval shape, you can do, or a cone shape, where you have a smaller circle, or oval actually, with a bigger oval stacked on top, and we're gonna pretend like we're connecting these for like a bowl. So picture a cereal bowl. And from there, where'd my black pen go? Oh. From there, you can pull out, you've got your light sketch, you can pull out your petals. So we've got petals in the front that are kind of wrapping around this front edge of the bowl, and then petals that go behind that, like that. Maybe we have a little one peeking out here and here. And again, just the little hatching we're doing to add detail on the petals. We're making sure that they're C curves and they follow the direction that the petal edge that they're closest to is curving. So this hatch right here is closest to this edge on the right, so it's curving the same direction. And always pointing back to that, wherever that bowl or bulb of the flower would be. So this is being, the bulb or stamen of the flower is being covered up or hidden by these front-facing petals. So we can't see it. And then this is our bulb, this is our mid spot connecting to the stem. And there you have it. A few different shapes. If you want more help with basic shapes and sketching flowers, check out my book, Everyday Watercolor Flowers. It has all of them in there with a few different examples and studies for a few different flowers. All right, so for this lesson, I'm going to teach you how to sketch some basic leaves, because again, if you're just sketching or you're illustrating with markers or pens or you're painting leaves, it's really helpful to understand the basic shape first and having that as your foundation before you paint, before you pick up a pen or a pencil. So for leaves, everything I do for a leaf is either a C curve or an S curve. That's it. So C curve, we obviously have one arch, and it can go either direction, obviously. An S curve has two arches, kind of like a snake or a worm. So obviously that might be pretty straightforward and obvious, but for those of you who aren't super familiar with sketching or drawing, C curve, S curve. So depending on the size of the leaf, the direction of the leaf, I will sometimes only use C curves, sometimes I'll only use S curves, sometimes I'll use both. So it's just kind of, what is the flower, what is the overall shape of the leaf, and what am I going for? So I'm going to show you how to do a basic C curve leaf first. So I'm going to start with the stem that leads into the middle vein of the leaf, and then the sides or edges of the leaf will come around it like a heart shape. So C curve. And when I'm drawing or sketching, I have a lot of wrist movement. No finger movement whatsoever unless I'm adding detail. So right now we're just getting the contour or the basic shape of the leaf down. And so I'm just using my wrist. You can also use your arm if you feel comfortable. Just make sure you're resting on the paper like this. If you're left-handed, you might need to tilt your paper and curve downwards like this and work this way. Whatever feels best for you and you're not going to smudge. So at the top of this C curve, I am then going to pull out a C curve on the left. And a C curve on the right, trying to reflect what is on the left over here on the right. So trying to meet the same point. So stopping at the same point, starting at the same point, same width. Obviously it's not going to be identical, but just having that, as it just looks awkward if we had like a really wide side over here and it was skinny over there. It just looks kind of awkward. So nothing in nature is perfectly symmetrical. That's what makes it nature and organic. But it does look a lot easier on the eyes if it's a little bit of a reflection. So then what that looks like, once you have your guide sketch down, you can go back over it with pen, or if you're painting on top of it, you're doing this on watercolor paper, then you could just do this lightly in pencil and erase the guides that you have underneath, like this obviously can be erased, and these dots or whatever you have underneath it. But those guides are just there to help you know how to draw that basic leaf shape. So basic leaf shape, C curves, 3 C curves. one curving this way. Well, they're actually all curving, not true. Two curving this way and one curving the opposite direction. Then let's do the same thing, but with S curves. So we're starting with the C curve. Again, you can use pencil to do this. I'm using marker, so it's more visible in the video. But we're starting with the C curve. So this is the stem and the main vein of the leaf. But then to give it more of a point at the top, I'm gonna do S curves for the edge of my leaf, the edges of my leaf. So I'm gonna curve in and hug the main vein and then curve out. And every time I curve out and come back in, I'm basically pointing right at the stem instead of doing it where I'm just kind of, and then we have this little opening. So same thing on the other side, hugging the stem or the vein and coming in. So that gives it more of a point. So if I were to draw on top of that to make it more obvious, we hug, hug, like so. And you can add detail if you want to with this basic hatching, or just leave it blank. I'm going to show you some leaves in a second that are more detailed. Now let's sketch a leaf that is a combo leaf, so S curve and C curves for the edges of the leaf. So again, I'm going to start with my C curve. You can make this an S curve if you want, but I'm going to do C curve. And then we're going to do just like we did in the previous exercise, we're going to do an S curve, but it's going to be shorter. It's going to go about halfway or 3/4 of the way down the leaf. So hug, then come out. And then about, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch up that S curve, the base of the S curve, we're going to come out to the right for a C curve. And then right there, we can connect for a little bloop, a little dip in the leaf. So then we're going to do the same thing, S curve, trying to stop at the same point, and then come out to the left of that base of that S curve and end at the same point. There we have a little peony leaf or some sort of jagged leaf. You can make this as jagged as you want to. You can do it 3 times or 2 times if you want. Just come and stop a little bit sooner. C curve, C curve, boop, boop, C curve, C curve, boop, boop. Boops necessary. Let's do what we just did and combine it for a cluster of leaves like on a peony flower. So we're going to start with our main middle C curve and have 2 other C curves. You can have this one reflecting the right side, the left side reflecting the right side, or you can have it come in the same direction, but I'm going to have it reflecting or kind of reflecting. And let's bring this up a little bit higher. So from here, I'm going to do my S curve to C curve situation. And not touch this just yet, because I might want to combine it with these side leaves. So do the same thing, S curve, C curve. And then you can combine them like so to be more like peony leaves. You got your flower over here. Like so. Then, bloop, that's just gonna bother me. Okay, so then last but not least, what was I gonna do? Okay, last but not least, we are going to be sketching. I'm obviously using a marker. You can use a pencil, so you can erase. We are going to be sketching the figure 8 leaf. This is longer, skinnier, like grass-like leaves, blades of grass, kind of like poppy leaves. Obviously, those are not thin like blades of grass, but longer and skinnier poppies. What are they called?
Tulips.
Tulips, thank you. Wow, John. Tulips, iris, longer, skinnier leaves instead of these shorter, fatter ones. So with a pencil, lightly sketch a long and skinny figure 8 that doesn't connect at the bottom. And that is your guide. That is your basic shape or curves that you're following. So this is a flipped over or folded leaf. So this is the bottom right here. The bottom is kind of twisted and it's curving over here. And here's the point. And then we see the back side of that leaf here. You can do it more flipped over, like so. Again, come down, loop like you're doing an 8, like a really flipped over 8, and then down. And you can make that more pointed if you want. Add a middle vein. So fun little exercise. Here is a couple examples in pencil of what that looks like. Hard to see with that underneath. What that looks like. So you've got your figure 8 happening right here. Woo! And look, it's just like a blade of grass or, what do I keep saying? Tulip leaf or an iris leaf. So practice your basic curves, your C curves, your S curves, and your figure 8 leaves until the, what's the phrase?
Sun comes out.
Until the sun comes out. And you are gonna have that muscle memory down, but it really does take patience and muscle memory to get that down. And this is going to help you with sketching. This is gonna help you with painting flowers and leaves. Make sure you check out, we'll link to all of the helpful videos that will help you with sketching leaves. We have a series of painting leaves in watercolor that we'll link, and then also a live video that I did here on YouTube that's all about sketching basic shapes for flowers and leaves. So check those out. Now we're going to be moving into how to paint basic petal shapes. So we're moving from sketching to painting. Now, in all of the stuff that I talked about in these previous lessons, like sketching basic flowers from basic shapes and then leaves, is going to be foundational knowledge for painting flowers and leaves and whatnot. But we're gonna break down some simple flowers first into curves and shapes because, again, that's what I love to do. All right, so just for this demo, I'm gonna be using my size 6 brush. If you've been following this channel for any number of weeks, then you know that I love the Princeton Heritage 4050 synthetic sable hair brushes. I love size 6, size 16, size 2. Those are my go-tos. Make sure you check out the video where I talk about all my supplies if you're curious, and we have them linked below, all the links to the supplies that I'm using. So to illustrate this, loose style watercolor flowers, I break down petal shapes into roughly 4 different shapes. So we're gonna start with one being the fluffy stuff. That's the technical term, you guys, the fluffy stuff. This could be the centers of peonies, like really fluffy peonies like this, or bigger fluff in the center of peonies. This could be berries, the fluffy berries. Where's some fluffy berries? We've got some fluffy berries here. Fluffy stuff. So for fluffy stuff, this is our first petal shape of 4. fluffy stuff, we are using the belly or the body of the brush. So again, I'm using a size 6 brush, and I am angling it perpendicular to the direction that I will be fluffing. So I'm using the width or belly of the brush to create the berry shape, the petal shape, whatever it is. So I'm literally just bringing this up and back down, up and back down. So if I'm pointing this way, I'm going to be perpendicular to that direction. So again, if this is like a peony, that would be the center, and then I would have teardrop shaped petals around it. But let's keep this simple for this demo because I'm going to be doing a peony in a second. Let's say these are berries. Let's do this again. Fluff it up and kind of create like a V shape with these fluffers, making sure they're pointing, coming to a point where the stem would be. And I'm just using a mixture of Scarlet Lake, Opera Rose, and Cadmium Orange for these. And again, just using the side of my brush to fluff around. And to just bring this forward a little bit, I'm going to add a stem so you can really see what's going on here. So we've got, this is pointing this direction, so we're going to pull that out here. Using sap green and lemon yellow deep for those stems and leaves. So fluffy stuff. This is great filler flower for if you're doing a full composition of flowers. It's good filler flower, it's good berries, just kind of filling in that white space between your bigger, fuller flowers like roses or peonies, whatever it is. Another way you can use fluffy stuff is for hydrangea, for cherry blossoms. So I'm going to mix up a really light peachy pink with Opera Rose, lemon yellow deep, lots of water, and maybe a touch of cadmium orange. And we're going to fluff it up. So again, the center of my flower is going to be roughly around here. I'm kind of eyeballing that. And I'm just going to use the side of the brush and fluff out. Maybe come down 2 to 3 times like so to form a petal shape. And then I'll come over here for some more fluff. Maybe this is like there's a little highlight there on the side of that petal. I'm gonna add a little bit more pink for these petals to show some variety. See how I'm just kind of doing this up and down motion. Nothing too complicated. Fluff it up. And then maybe we've got a cluster of cherry blossoms here. Fluff, fluff. Always making sure my petals are pointing straight back to wherever the center of the flower would be. And one up here. Fluff. The more water you have on your brush, the lighter your color will be. So if you want these really soft petals, then just make sure you have a lot of water in your mixture, but always dab your excess water off on your paper towel before going to your paper so you don't create puddles, which will create hard lines and wonkiness. If you haven't checked it out yet, check out the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor. So this is the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor Flowers, but that one will talk a lot more about the basics of watercolor, like wet and wet technique versus wet and dry, how to control your water. We also have a video on controlling your water, tips for controlling your water. So we've got our little cluster of cherry blossoms or dogwood. If you're to do like a ball of these, it would be a hydrangea. We also have a hydrangea video. Check it out. And then you can add your center for your flower. I'm just gonna do 3 little dots of burnt umber mixed with Mars Black for the center of these cutie guys, these cutie fluffies. Again, you get a lot of technical terms when you watch this channel. I'm going to use the tip of my brush, so I've got more of a slanted hold on my brush instead of flat, so that I can use the point of my round tip brush. And I'm just going to paint in 3-ish dots. If they touch the wet petal, I don't mind one bit because it's cute. I love the wet and wet look. And make sure your dots aren't all uniform and all the same size. So we've got some bigger ones, a smaller one. Mix it up. There you go. So there is one basic stroke or shape for how to paint flowers. The next one is going to be the teardrop petal. So teardrop petals, you're gonna use teardrop petals for peonies quite a lot. So here is a peony with a good teardrop shape. You know, we come for a rounded top and it tapers off like a little raindrop or teardrop. Same with this petal, same with this petal. This is just a longer, skinnier one. This is a longer, fatter one. Short, fat one, teardrop shape right here. So this basic petal, the teardrop shape, I use this a lot for my peonies. I also use it for like cone flowers or black-eyed Susans. They're just longer and skinnier. And we're gonna do a longer teardrop shape for our last exercise in this. You can also use the teardrop shape for little bulbs or buds of flowers. So like these little tulips are teardrop shapes. So let's do some of those to practice. Again, using my size 6 brush. Grab whatever color is calling your name. You could do purple, you could do blue. I'm gonna do pink. Opera rose is what I'm soaking up here, and I'm just gonna do a touch of cadmium orange. Basically, we can break down this teardrop shape into 2 parts. So I'm gonna do it real quick without me talking, and then I'm gonna talk you through it. So I'm gonna point my brush to the base of the teardrop. That. So what you're doing is you're pointing towards, so instead of like the fluff where we're on the side and we're perpendicular to the direction the petal is pointing, we're gonna be in line with the direction the petal is pointing. So I am going to be pointing the tip of my brush towards the base of the teardrop and have a slanted hold, so about 40 degrees away from the paper with my brush handle. I'm going to point, press, curve in. And as I'm curving in, I'm kind of lifting off too, so it doesn't have this like rough edge at the top. And then I'm gonna come up just a little bit higher, so not totally equal at the base. I'm gonna come up a little bit higher and leave a gap of white space. You can stop there if you want to, or if you're doing a really fat petal, then just kind of go on the side of that and keep, I mean, you can do this for days, depending on how fat you want that petal. So we're just kind of creating a fan shape. So depending on the size of the petal that you want, you're gonna stop after 2 or you're gonna keep going. So again, for the front of like a peony, let's say, we've got our first big petal in the front here. And then maybe we've got a teardrop where we only see the side and it starts to go behind this petal. So we're lifting it behind and only coming down a little bit. And you can use wet and wet technique to add in some more color. And then same thing over here. We've got a teardrop lifting up and around this front petal. And then we're going to use some of that fluffy stuff to fill in the tops of these petals, like so. And then you can do an upside down teardrop for a petal that's falling away. Like that. Okay, let's do that again. So for a peony, we've got do a teardrop. See how that is up a little bit higher. Maybe for my next petal, I grab a little bit of orange so that it looks like a separate petal. Curve in. Maybe a little fatter. And you can stop right here, add a stem and a leaf for a heart-shaped flower, maybe like a bud or a tulip, and call it a day. But for a peony, we're gonna make this come out and above here. For a basic loose style fluffy peony. And then we're just fluffing. So that white space is really crucial because it shows the separate petals. And you also want to make sure that all of your petals are pointing back to that leaf. So again, if you didn't watch the beginning part of this video where I covered how to sketch a basic flower, go back and watch that because that is going to inform how you place your petals when you're painting. You're making sure they're always pointing back to that spot where the stem is connected to the bulb of the flower. So again, curving in, curving in. Getting lighter for the petals that go around and in the back. There you have it for your peonies. So cute. Next up is going to be the almond shape. So this one is super duper simple, but a lot of people overthink it and then make it more complicated than it actually is. But to create an almond shaped with the round tip brush, all you have to do is place your brush down on the paper. So this could be used for lavender, rosemary if you have a greenish color and you're doing more like an herb or leaves. I'm gonna do cobalt blue, a little Prussian blue, and some ultramarine violet for my lavender color, and a lot of water. So I'm gonna dab off the excess water on my paper towel before I do this. So almond shaped flower or petal, whatever, all you're gonna do is have a slanted hold with your brush and point. If I'm painting lavender, we're gonna kind of eyeball where the stem is and just press down on the paper. Maybe drag up a little bit. Press and drag. Press and drag. So literally just placing, and wherever the petal is connecting to the stem, I'm pointing my brush, the tip of my brush towards. So we get that point at the base of the almond shape. Just kind of fluffing around. So we get to the top and we've got some lavender, folks. This again makes some, for bouquets, makes some great filler flower. Adds shape and length to your bouquets or to your floral pieces. Great to have. And you can do that not just with lavender, you can do it for delphinium if you want to. Delphinium's a good one. Let's fluff it out down here a little bit more. Bloop, bloop. Okay, next petal shape to practice is the long teardrop shape. So we did teardrop up here for the peonies, the bigger petal flowers. And then for our cone-shaped flowers, or anything that kind of looks like a ballet skirt, like a black-eyed Susan or echinacea flower, we're gonna do the same stroke, but for longer. So I'm gonna do a black-eyed Susan, and they kind of have like their petals, instead of coming up for a bowl shape, they just kind of are like an umbrella. So I'm gonna eyeball where the bulb of the flower is gonna be right here. And I'm just going to point and drag for pressure and curve in, just like we did here. And then come up a little bit, again, just like we did for the shorter teardrop, and curve in like that. So that's one side of my umbrella or my ballet skirt. The other side, we're gonna go directly across from the left side. So we're not starting down here or up here, we're coming directly across. Press and drag, curve in. And like that. And then we'll do these other these other petals the same way. Longer teardrops. Like so. And then we've got a dark bulb in the center. Burnt umber and Mars black is what I'm using. And we're just gonna blah 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 blah. Whoops, where'd that come from? Don't you love that, painters? Booyah. Let's cover that up. What happened here? Blah, blah. There's your stem. Boop. So longer teardrop petals. Good for daisies. Good for echinacea flower. Good for black-eyed Susan, like I said. But you're just point, press, curve in. Come up a little bit higher, curve in. This is just the sides of these. So if this is your first time painting flowers like this, please keep in mind, go back to the sketching lesson where I show you how to sketch from basic shapes. But for these cone-shaped flowers, or ballet skirt as I like to call them, you're always envisioning in mind where the center of the flower is. So you could draw a line down the center of the bulb, and that would connect to the stem. And from there, this is just, again, if I were to sketch it, a ballet skirt. So I've got my C curves on the sides with a C curve on the bottom. So all of my petals are pointing back to the center of the flower and forming to create a little ballet skirt. And for your peonies, you've got a V shape or this bowl shape. So I started with a small oval and then a big oval to sketch that. Same thing when you're painting it. You are kind of envisioning how that bowl is created. So the opening of the bowl is at the top here. That's why it's crucial to leave some white space so it looks like a separate row of flower or petals and doesn't just look like it bleeds into the same petal. So make sure you're keeping that in mind and practicing your sketching as well as practicing painting the actual flower. So doing this over and over again, creating and filling up sheets of these basic shapes for petals, doing your berry fluffy stuff in different shapes and colors and directions. You can do it in I did it in this dark blue down here with Prussian blue and Mars black, and smaller than I did up here. So you've got some like really nice agapanthus?
No idea on that one.
I just brain melted. Agapanthus stuff, I think is what it's called. Dogwood or hydrangea or cherry blossoms. And this is another fluffy stuff that's bigger. I don't know, we could call that a tulip. We could call it a peony. We could call it many things. Loose style flowers. So keep it loose. Focus on practicing those 4 shapes over and over and over again, and you will develop that muscle memory and get more comfortable every single time, and you'll be able to envision the shape of the flower as you're painting, so you'll be more confident as you're painting. All right, in this lesson, I'm going to teach you how to paint basic leaves. So using my size 6 brush, I'm going to load up with a leaf color. I'm doing sap green and a touch of lemon yellow deep because that's my favorite mixture for leaves. Leaves, I want you to keep in mind, if you're not super comfortable with painting watercolor leaves yet, just keep in mind they are challenging at first. But what you're going to keep in mind is the direction the leaf is pointing, you want your brush to also point. So if my leaf is going to point this way, then my brush is in line with that. If my leaf is pointing straight up, then I'm going to point my brush in line with that. And I'm keeping a slanted hold the entire time. And so for your basic leaf stroke, it's kind of similar to calligraphy or brush lettering. You are applying pressure and dragging that brush in a straight line and then gradually releasing that pressure. Because you're gradually releasing that pressure on the leaf, it's going to curve in naturally. The round brush is just going to naturally curve in. That's why I love working with round brushes, because you can get really wide strokes and really thin strokes. So you put pressure on your brush and you get a wide stroke, or you can just put little to no pressure on your brush and you get a really fine, thin stroke. So when we're doing that for our leaves, I'm going to start with a little thin stroke for a basic stem. I'm pointing in line with the direction my leaf is pointing or the direction the stem is pointing, and I'm going to apply pressure, drag it in a straight line, and then gradually release that pressure as thin and as light with pressure as I possibly can, so that tip of the leaf gets really, really thin. And then I'm going to start at the same point and come down a little bit and do the same. Pressure and release and get thin at the tip. So again, this is not as easy as it looks, but what you're doing is break it down into a compound stroke of pressure and release. So we're just doing pressure, dragging up or across, and releasing that pressure. And you see that straight line at the bottom edge of that leaf or the side of the leaf that I just painted down the middle. That is because I'm not curving my hand around or my brush around to make the curve of the leaf. I'm literally just dragging it across in a straight line. So let's finish that off with the bottom side of the leaf. Pressure, release. So if it helps you to see this, what I'm doing is dragging my brush in a straight line. So starting with pressure, and you see how the bottom edge of my brush is still on that line, gradually releasing. And now the top edge of my brush is going to be on that line. Pressure, gradually release. So let me show you now what beginners do in terms of mistakes when painting leaves. So a lot of people will think again that they need to curve their fingers around for the curve of the leaf. So they curve like this, or they curve, the brush around a little bit. And so they get these really fat or curvy looking leaves. You do not need to curve your fingers around, your brush around, none of it. It doesn't move. This is basically like a brush holder. Your hand is like a brush rest or a brush holder. So if it were like in a cup or something, all you were doing is just dragging it in a straight line. Obviously that would not work, but your hand is just a prop to hold the brush. So starting with the stem, pressure, release, pressure, release. Get messy. Another thing beginners will do is they won't use the full point of the brush. They'll kind of just rush through that or put too much pressure on it or not get light enough with their pressure. So it'll look like either this where they rush through it and then the tip of their leaf just kind of looks like a fish mouth, or they won't release the pressure enough. So it'll just kind of be too fat and still kind of a cute leaf. But if you want that point on the leaf, just make sure, let's go up here. If you want that point on the leaf, you can really drag these round brushes with little to no pressure and get really thin. So pressure, release, and drag it out. Like so. So let's do this on a stem. So I'm going to mix up a stem color with burnt umber and Mars Black. And for my stems, I'm going to be using a slanted hold, but it's in between slanted and vertical. So I'm using the tip of the brush because I want it to be really thin. And I'm going to stabilize my arm on the table. Again, my hand is just a prop. It doesn't move around. I don't move my fingers. I'm just pivoting at my elbow and kind of like the hand of a clock, going like this to create a very light C curve with my brush, using the tip of the brush. So I'm going to rinse that brown color off and we're going to move on to our leaf color. Maybe I'll mix up Prussian blue with some sap green. Look at some reference photos if you need to for color mixing ideas, but blue greens, I like to make it a little bit smoky with adding burnt umber and Mars Black. More of a sagey undertone green. The lighter greens are just gonna have a lot more water in the mixture. Just make sure you're dabbing off the excess water on your paper towel so you don't create puddles. A lot of people get those like puddles on the tips of their leaves, and that usually means the paper they're using isn't good quality. It's not 100% cotton, and so it's not soaking up the excess water, or they have too much water on their brush. So make sure you dab it off before going to your stem. So I'm pointing my brush in line with the direction the leaf is pointing, which is going to be growing out of that stem. So a lot of people will make the mistake of having a leaf pointing this way on a stem like that, and that just looks like I went and broke off the leaf, and it doesn't really make sense. So pressure, gradually release. Pressure, gradually release. And if you want, you can make this leaf fatter by just kind of going over that a couple of times. And as you can see right here, there's a little bit of excess water, so I'm going to grab a dry brush and soak that up before it dries. So water control is very difficult with watercolor. It's not something that you perfect over time, really. It continues to happen. You definitely get better at it and noticing it and avoiding it, but it will still happen. I'm gonna have these leaves overlap a little bit. We're using wet and wet here. So I'm pointing in line with that stem, pressure, release, and drag out the thin tip. I want this to be a little fatter. And then we can add more stems once we see where those leaves are going. When we have a stem like this, I always make sure to not use the same color or value for every single leaf. If I did, it would look very two-dimensional, very flat. So I'm mixing up some yellow greens, some blue greens, all kind of within the same family. So all of them have a brown undertone. So they're not like a really bright, poppy, vivid green and then a super sagey, muted green. They're all kind of within the same undertone family. If you need help, more help with leaves, check out our series on painting leaves. Tons and tons of videos in there that will help you. So even though this leaf is pointing down while the stem is pointing up, I'm still making sure to curve into that first, instead of just placing it here. One more. Like so. There's your little leaf cluster. Now let's practice some longer leaves like we would have on an iris or a poppy tulip. What the heck?
I don't know.
A tulip or an iris. So for this style leaf, we're doing the exact same thing we did up here, but we're gonna stretch, add pressure, and pull it out longer. And we're only doing one side. So I'm gonna start with the stem first and maybe just do a C curve. Pressure, then start gradually releasing. So it's a longer leaf like on a tulip. So we could have the flower here. Let's say, and we practiced our basic petal shapes in the previous lesson. Schwank, little tulip. You could also have a leaf that is curving, pressure, release for a little bend and curve. Release the pressure, add the pressure, release the pressure for the tip. Release. Makes it look like it's really natural and there's kind of some breeze flowing. Like so. So, a couple different leaves, but all of your leaves really are gonna form using that same compound stroke that we practiced in the beginning. You could also, to mix it up as well and do like a jagged edge leaf, like a rose leaf, you're gonna do what we did up top with pressure and release. So I'm gonna start with the stem first. Pressure, gradually release. Pressure, gradually release. Let's make that fatter. More oval shaped leaf. And then to make it jagged like a rose leaf, I'm just gonna come and flick out the side of my brush on the edge of the leaf. Like so. Or a peony leaf, which is longer. Pressure, release. coming in for a C curve, and then doing another kind of leaf shape at the top. C curve. Like so. There you have it. Practice those leaves. They are not easy. They're a lot more difficult than they look. So have patience with yourself. I would even fill up a sheet or two of just these compound strokes by themselves, so you really get that muscle memory down, and then you can get more free flowing with it. Do your full stem, do your tulip leaves, peony and rose leaf, and have fun with it. Okay, so for this lesson, I'm going to show you how to paint an anemone flower. This flower is going to use teardrop shaped petals like I showed you in one of the previous lessons. And then from our sketching tutorials that I've shown you in this video as well, keep in mind your anemone flower is a star-shaped flower. So we're kind of making sure our petals are all pointing back to the center. And I'm going to use my size 16 brush for this because I'm going to paint really large petals using cobalt blue and ultramarine violet. If you guys know me at all, you know my least favorite color is purple. But for this anemone, I'm going to paint this color anemone, so we're doing it. A lot of people like purple, so we're using it. And I do like certain shades of purple. I like cobalt blue mixed with ultramarine violet and maybe a touch of opera rose. It's a nice purple. All right, so keep in mind we're gonna have the bulb of the flower envisioned in our head before we actually paint it, but that's gonna inform where all of my petals point. So whatever direction your petal is pointing, you're gonna have your brush point as well. So if my petal is pointing this way, I'm gonna have it go this way. If you need help with painting petal shapes, make sure you go back to that lesson. But I'm gonna do a teardrop shape here, pointing back to where I know that bulb is going to go. And I have really fat teardrops, so I did it a few times on either side. And we're gonna come float over here, kind of hugging where that bulb is gonna go. So it's gonna go right here. So these bottom points are kind of parallel to each other. I'm going right across, curving in. And then we're going to go behind where the bulb is, right here. And always pointing back to the center of the flower. And then from here, I'm going to grab more of that color, thicker mixture of that color, so that it's darker or more opaque. I'm going to add some darker wet details to the base of these petals while they're still wet, so you get that fun magic moment and that soft blend between light and dark. So just dropping it in, maybe up here as well, or on the edge of a petal to show that it's a separate petal. And then we can grab our stamen color. I'm going to grab Mars Black, some Prussian blue, a little bit more blue. And I'm just using a slanted hold, pressing and lifting right there. I'm going to let that dry, so then I'm going to add the stamen after. Teardrop shape. So while these petals are drying before I add the stamen, I can now move on to my stems and leaves. Make sure you go back to that leaf lesson, and then I'm going to make them a little jagged like anemone leaves by flicking around the edge. This bleed with the green and the blue, I like the green one. The blue one I'm going to lift off before it dries, which is the beauty of watercolor. It's like you can kind of erase or make things more subtle. The green one I might just kind of clean up a little bit, but I like that bleed. If you don't like it, then obviously you can clean it up. And then I'm going to move on to this flower. I'm just going to kind of dot around. I really do love the darker color bleeding in there, but I don't want it to take over. So I'm watching that as it's bleeding and drying to make sure it doesn't take over. We've got the center of our anemone here. You can add little eyelashes with the tip of the brush, pointing back to that bulb. Just always keep in mind the basic shape of the flower, that every petal, every stamen, dot, all of it is pointing back to the center. And then if you have a hard time with water control or wet and wet technique, make sure you check out the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor, because that goes into detail on those basic techniques that you should know when you are painting with watercolor if you're new or need help with that. So make sure you go check out that video. But these bleeds are making a lovely situation. I'm just going to go in and on these petals that are still wet, add some darker purple just to show some more depth that is not wet, so I can show you what to do there. Just lift it. And there you go, there's your anemone flower. Two varieties of this anemone flower. I could go back over this bulb right here once this dries with black to really make that blue, that center bulb area pop around the blue. But remember, you're creating a star-shaped flower with your anemones. So all of your petals are pointing back to the center of that flower, and we're using teardrop-shaped petals for the anemone petals. So make sure you go back to our sketching lesson where I show you how to envision that star shape, and then also for our basic petal lesson to get that teardrop shape down. All right, so I'm going to show you how to master your delphinium flowers. If you didn't watch the petal lesson where I cover basic shapes of petals, make sure you watch that. But we're basically going to be doing a combination of the fluffy stuff, technical terms, and the almond-shaped petal combos for delphinium. If you haven't seen a delphinium flower before, I love them so much. But they've got these blossoms, these open blossoms that are really just like a cluster of a bunch of petals, and then it tapers at the top of the stalk. So that's where we're going to have our almond-shaped petals, and down here we're just going to be using the belly of the brush for the fluffy stuff. So I'm going to mix up some opera rose. I need some more in my palette, but we'll just use what is there, even though it has some blue in it, that's fine. Some opera rose, and do like a lighter pinky peach for my delphinium with lemon yellow deep and yellow ochre, and a lot of water. So I'm going to start with my size 6 brush. We're going to just envision where the stem is going to be for the stalk of this flower, and it's kind of a straighter, like how foxgloves or tall, like sunflowers have a really long straight stem, thick stem. So we're just gonna do that, and I'm going to just add these and then later add my stem. So we're envisioning where it is. So we're using the side of the brush, the belly of the brush, and just kind of lightly fluffing around where the center of this small flower will be, and we're leaving an opening in the center. I'm just using the side of the brush so the tops of these petals are rounded or flat instead of pointed. So I'm not using the brush like this. And then I'm going to go around kind of where I'm envisioning this stalk to be. I'm going to add some flowers that you don't see the center, so we just see the side of it. So we're creating like a V shape here. Cone flower. Fluff, fluff. Maybe another open flower up here. Fluffing, 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 fluffing. Adding in some yellow to some of these spots for some variety. Fluffing around. So what I'm keeping in mind is not only these individual flowers, but the whole spear shape of the delphinium. So I'm gonna start wider at the base. And then start to get thinner as we work up. Fluffy fluff. So now I'm starting to come up here. And I'm going pretty quickly with all of these fluffy petals. Just using the side of my brush and following the basic shape of the flower. Either this V shape from viewing the flower from the side, coming around to create a bowl, or the circular kind of star shape. And adding in darker hues, lighter hues, pinkier colors, yellower, orangier flowers, maybe some purple. The fluffy stuff. So now as we start to get towards the top of this stalk, I am going to start using the almond-shaped petal. Like it's a little bud flower. Point and drag, point and drag. And finish it off like that. I want to show the stem through there and some green almond shapes and leaves. Got sap green and lemon yellow deep, and I'm going to kind of eyeball where the center of this triangle is for my stem, and it's going off the page. I'm using the side of my brush instead of the point of my brush because I want it to be a thicker stem like on these delphinium flowers. We've got some offshoots. We're following that, peeking through here and here. Coming up here. And I'm adding some green almond shapes. Kind of hugging some of these pink ones for little leaves. Very simple way to do some leaves. And then I'm just going to go back into some of these open flowers to make them look like, oh yeah, that's an open flower, with some burnt umber Mars Black, and just do a couple dots with the tip of my brush. Some bigger, some smaller. There you go for that delphinium. Fluffy stuff. All right, This flower, I'm going to show you how to master the iris, loose style iris in watercolor. And if you missed the section or lesson on how to sketch basic shapes for flowers, this is a bell shape for the bottom or a skirt for the bottom, and then also a cone shape or a bell shape for the top. So we're following those basic shapes for painting this flower. I'm going to mix up. There are so many different beautiful colors for irises. I think bearded iris is my favorite flower. It's like so cool. But I'm going to do like a golden yellow with lemon yellow deep and yellow ochre for the base of my petals. And I'm going to, for all my loose style florals, I'm always making sure to point back to the center or the bulb of the flower where the bulb and the stem are connected. So I'm envisioning that with my eye, and I'm going to grab that golden yellow color and just pull out these long teardrop shaped petals with long fluffy stuff. So if you missed the basic petal shapes lesson, go back to that. I'm doing a combo of long teardrop shaped flat petals and fluffy stuff because I want this jagged, frilly skirt look to the bottom of my iris. And I'm going to come out here maybe and do some more frills. I've got my size 16 brush. And then while that is still wet, I'm going to grab some ultramarine violet, cobalt blue, and opera rose for a purple color that I'm just going to work in using wet and wet. Fluffy stuff. You can use a reference photo for this if you need to know like color combos for bearded iris, but I am just kind of going off of memory. And kind of making it my own, interpreting it. But using that wet and wet technique is really just a beautiful way to capture the essence of an iris. Now I'm going to grab yellow ochre and a touch of burnt umber and some scarlet lake and go back in these petals and add some darker golden lines. So there is my, what is it? Flamenco dancing?
Flamenco skirt.
Flamenco skirt. Base or trumpet bell shape. And we're going to do the same thing with lemon yellow deep, touch of yellow ochre for the top. And these petals are like the teardrop shape, but we're going to make them longer and more frilly. So I'm going to create a bowl shape or a trumpet shape on top. So basically kind of mirroring what I did on the bottom, but with long teardrop shaped petals like so. But I'm going to make them frillier by adding some texture. And then we've got another one here. Love that bleed. But make it frilly. So again, these little gaps of white space, you want to make sure that you don't have too much white space because then it's just going to look a little too separated with your petals. But that's what really helps show that it's a separate petal. So you want to keep that in mind as you're painting these. Then I might come out for a wide one over here that's really light. And go back in with some purple. just hints here and there. For that texture. And then I'm gonna grab like a really nice yellow orange with cadmium orange and lemon yellow deep. And this is where the stamen of the flower is gonna go. So I'm just gonna grab the side of my size 16 brush and give it that little moment. Let it do its thing. Help it bleed a little more if you want. And then I want to match the undertone of this flower. These petals are more muted. They're not as, you know, bright and poppy as like these pinks. So I'm grabbing sap green and I'm going to make it more smoky or muted with some burnt umber. Maybe a touch of Prussian blue. And I'm going to come up using the side of my brush. Dance around. Dance around that. And maybe we've got a little bud over here. Just one teardrop petal, and then we're just gonna frill it. There you go. For your iris, this is probably the more complicated one in the series of 3 that we just did, but keep in mind you've got a skirt here and a skirt up top, or a trumpet shape, because the petals go around. And we're laying down those either fluffy strokes where it's just using the side of the brush and pulling it down, or we're doing our teardrop shape, and then we're going back in with other color, dropping in with wet and wet and adding that really jagged texture to the petals. Alrighty, so now that you've learned how to sketch basic flowers, you've learned how to sketch leaves, and you've learned how to paint basic flower petals and paint flowers. We painted an anemone, delphinium, and an iris. We're now going to combine that for a full floral composition watercolor piece, but before we get there, I'm going to cover my process for mixing colors. So first things first, reference photo or reference material. Your reference material can be a real life subject, like a bouquet of flowers or some stems of flowers that you picked yourself, whatever, or an inspiration photo. So the inspiration photo or reference photo can be, again, a photo of a flower bouquet that you're painting and referencing for colors and for the actual flowers. For me, though, I feel very comfortable with painting flowers from my imagination because I paint from basic shapes and break it down with petal shapes, which is what I showed you in these previous lessons. But I'm going to be using this photo, Sonora Art Village, that I found on Pinterest. I love the colors in this photo. We have a lot of bright limish greens in the cactus, and then some some softer eucalyptus color bluish green in the agave plant. There's some bright orange, some bright canary yellow, and then there's some softer cobalts and softer pinks in the background that I love. I might incorporate that purple in the background. Heyo, that's a pinky based purple. And then some deeper cobalt. So with this as my reference photo, I'm gonna just spend the next few minutes mixing up these colors. So I'm gonna grab my size 6 brush, and obviously with my palette, it's very messy, and I like that. If I'm going to mix up colors that I know would work well with a base of purple or a base of red, then I'll go on top of that. But for the sake of making these colors really clean and vibrant, I'm gonna use this little dish that I have that doesn't have much color on it, so I'm just gonna use it for mixing up my colors. So let's start with this orange here. It's a very red tinted orange. Think about the color wheel. We're thinking about secondary and tertiary colors. So what undertone or bias does this orange have? It definitely has an undertone of red, so I have some red here. And we also want to think about the mood or the saturation of the color. So is the saturation more vibrant? Is it leaning towards really vibrant, or is it leaning towards muted? All of these colors on here are going to be really vibrant leaning. So we don't have, we're going to have Scarlet Lake mixed with cadmium orange for our red, or for our red orange, instead of Scarlet Lake, burnt umber and orange, which is going to make it a more burnt orange look. So we want really clean, really vibrant colors. I've got Scarlet Lake, and we're just going to add a touch of cadmium orange to that. And that looks a little too orange. Grab a touch of Scarlet Lake, and then testing out the colors. I'm going to come up here and test out my swatches on paper. So this is super helpful to do because then you can see all the colors lined up and see how they cooperate with one another. And color usually looks slightly different on paper than it does in your palette. So I want a deeper red orange as well. So I added a couple more touches of Scarlet Lake to that. And we can have a lighter version of it by just lightening the mixture with water. And then we come up here, we have some pretty just plain orange vibe. So I'm gonna just grab a couple dips of Scarlet Lake to deepen that orange a little bit, make it a little bit more red, but not too close to my red orange. For that, and we can lighten that as well with water. So far, everything is working very well together, and in an analogous color palette, we're combining red, orange, orange, and then yellow, orange, and yellow for a peaceful transition for people's eyes for our colors. Because if they're sitting right next to each other on a color wheel, they're neighbors. They are next door neighbors, so they're not jumping across from each other on the color wheel to create more contrast. It's a very peaceful transition, easy transition for people's eyes to look through. So this canary yellow, lemon yellow deep has an orangey reddish undertone to it already, but this canary yellow has a little bit of blue tint to it. It's cleaner looking than just this like brownish orangey yellow. So I'm gonna add just a touch of phthalo turquoise. I also have this lemon yellow deep right here. That is what I mix phthalo turquoise with, or cobalt turquoise with. And so I'm just gonna grab that, just a touch of it, and mix it in. So, well, now I grabbed orange, so we're gonna have to do that again. So it just makes it kind of zaps that orange undertone. It like erases that. What is that word? Negates. Mm-hmm. Is that the word?
Yes.
Negates that. Just, we want a clean yellow. Still a warm yellow, but you know, you get it. Maybe a little more yellow to brighten it, clean it up a little bit. There we go. Bright, bright canary yellow. And so we've got our red orange here, lighter, and then our orange, our yellow, let's move into the lime green. Oh, I need to lay down my swatch. Very nice, love that yellow, it's beautiful. And now let's move on the cool side of yellow for these lime green colors. So cobalt turquoise.
Manganese blue.
Manganese blue. No, this is cobalt turquoise.
Okay.
Cobalt turquoise and lemon yellow deep. If I want a bright lime yellow, lemon yellow green, lime yellow.
Struggles.
Like a chartreuse color, I'm going to use cobalt turquoise and lemon yellow deep because that cobalt turquoise, that turquoise element mixed with yellow just makes it just makes it that neon color. But if I were to mix Prussian blue and yellow, another blue, but just a darker, richer blue, then I would get more of these green, sagey undertones in the yellow green. It wouldn't be chartreuse. So I'm going to use cobalt turquoise instead of Prussian blue or cobalt blue. Cobalt blue, when I mix with yellow, is more muted, so it's a softer color. So I'm going to use phthalo turquoise. Nope. Cobalt turquoise. And lemon yellow deep. I want it to be a little more yellow. Let's come over here and boom. I usually have my colors mixed up a little bit ahead of time before I start painting a full floral piece, so I have them for painting quickly. But even throughout the painting, I'm mixing colors and I'm adding new colors, so this is just to get started. So there's my chartreusey lime green, and we can lighten that with water. We got that. Now I want to get in this like agave color, which is going to be some cobalt turquoise mixed with brown and a lot of water. So brown has a little touch of red to it. This is a red bias brown. Phthalo turquoise has a green undertone. So red and green are contrasting colors. So it's making for a muted color, a smoky, sagey color. A little bit more. Why don't you let me zoom on that particular color? Get out of here. Okay. There, that's nice. So smoky blue to contrast the oranges, because orange and blue are contrasting colors. And then I love this like Easter egg blue and Easter egg pink, pale pink, springy colors. So we're gonna do cobalt. Cobalt blue is a nice baby blue, but it's a bit richer. So we're gonna add, if you have white gouache on hand, that's perfect for that springy vibe. I have a little bit left over up here that I'm just snagging. Hopefully I have enough. But you can also lighten your blue with water, your cobalt with water. But that's pretty bomb right there. Yep. I need a little more cobalt. And pink. So a pale, pale pink, opera rose, and white gouache. I have it up here. Let's create some space somewhere. There we go. Beautiful color palette. So that is my approach for mixing colors. Again, usually with a reference photo of either the subject that I'm actually painting but usually it's of something that is inspirational for the colors. The reason is the colors. So it doesn't matter what it is. It could be buildings, it could be an ocean, a photo of an ocean, a photo of a car, a photo of literally anything, as long as the colors are speaking to me and I really want to use them and they make sense in the context of what I'm painting. So I'm painting flowers today, and this definitely makes sense for that context. So that is how I mix up colors. And you want to remember, again, studying color theory. So we'll link to the videos that I've done on my YouTube channel where I talk about color mixing. I've done a color study video and some color theory lessons as well. But you want to think about what is the overall undertone or bias of the color. So we're going for vibrant or less vibrant or muted. So for this color palette, we were leaning towards vibrant, and then we had softer colors. This isn't muted, that's just softer. So it's not like a brown or a black undertone, it's just muted and more pastel. So these were white. White is gonna make it more pastel, or adding more water if you don't have white gouache to make it a lighter version. And making sure that our greens and our bright yellows stayed really vibrant by adding in touches of cobalt turquoise even here to lemon yellow deep, but just a very small touch so that it stayed vibrant and not too warm. And then again, mixing up our red oranges with Scarlet Lake and cadmium orange and all of that. So now that I have this color palette, I'm ready to paint my full floral piece. So the next lesson, I'm going to focus on floral composition and how to know where to paint what for your full floral composition. Okie dokie, so I'm gonna move my reference photo over. So I've got my reference photo moved to the side. I'm gonna use a clean sheet. This is gonna turn into scrap practice paper for another thing. But you can tear off your color swatch to have as like a little bookmark or reference of your colors that you're using. So I'm gonna have that nearby. So I have my color reference, and in this lesson, we are going to be painting a floral composition piece, knowing where to paint what in your floral pieces and how to start it, how to know how much white space, all that kind of stuff. But before I dive into painting my floral piece, I'm going to talk about composition on some of these paintings that I already have done. So for example, everything that I do that's a bouquet or a centerpiece, my mom was a florist, bless her soul, very talented. I don't know why I said bless her soul. She's still alive.
She's definitely still alive. She's perfectly healthy.
She's perfectly healthy. Hi, Jill. She was a florist, no longer as a florist, for weddings and events and all of that. And so I would, go in the garage with her a lot of the times and help her create centerpieces or bouquets. And she would teach me, like, here's kind of how I want the organic tossed look for these bouquets or whatever. And it was always about S-curve and C-curve. That's how I came up with the S-curve, C-curve thing for my composition. Thank you, Mom. Not sure where you learned it, but it's just naturally for people's eyes when they're looking at a bouquet, a centerpiece, some sort of floral structure, is to have that natural look instead of that tight ball look that you'll see in a lot of wedding bouquets. But to have that natural organic look is that S or C curve. So for example, this composition, our highest point is up here in the top right. Our lowest point is right here down on the almost opposing corner. So we're not a direct diagonal, which would look kind of strange. We're pointing down towards the middle. So people's eyes look up at this beautiful flower and then they pour here. And there's always a zigzag between elements. So we have a zigzag here between these three little buds. We have a zigzag happening with our blue agapanthus or lily of the Nile flower. And we're zigging zagging with all of these different leaves and whatnot. So as I'm painting this next floral piece, I'm going to talk about how I place my elements, where I place what. But overall, you want to be thinking about leading people's eyes down the page in either a C curve or an S curve. And that is going to determine where you place things. So keep that in mind. And you never want your elements to land like in a perfect tight ball in the center. So I have my highest element here, my lowest element here, and neither of them are too close to the center. So keep that in mind. All right, so I've got my color palette mixed up, showed you that in the previous lesson. I'm gonna use my size 16 brush for this, and I'm gonna paint big old peony flowers because people love their peonies. And if you haven't or didn't watch the petal lesson, the lesson where I teach you the basic shapes of petals, we talk about the teardrop shape petal, and that is what I'm going to be using for these peonies. And I'm going to mix up this really soft pink that I had in my reference photo. I'm going to use that for my peonies, and then some oranges and red oranges we're going to use for maybe some cone flowers. Yellows we'll use for some berries and accent flowers, and then the lime greens and sagey greens or agave green we're going to use for the leaves. So I've got my soft pink, and I'm going to start with my first peony. So I'm going to have my first peony kind of placed right here, pointing up here. The very first thing I like to do in my floral composition pieces is take as much white space away from me as I possibly can so that I feel more confident and more eased into the piece. So if I start with just little tiny flowers here and there, and they're super spread out, that doesn't really get me anywhere too fast. And so if I paint a big flower right from the get-go, I know, okay, now I can see this kind of taking shape. So I paint my big flowers first. This is just like how my mom used to structure flower pieces for weddings or events. Would take her big stems first. If it was peonies, roses, whatever the bigger bulb flowers were, those first. And then we're plugging in our filigree, our leaves, our berries, or whatever to create the S curve or the C curve around it. So I'm going to start with one of the front teardrop shaped petals of my flower first. This color is divine, truly. And each petal is going to have a slightly different hue or value to it, value being the lightness and darkness, and then hue is obviously the color. So I'm grabbing a little bit more opera rose for this next petal. And maybe this teardrop petal is a little more bumped up here. Maybe some orange. So again, teardrop shaped petals. I'm using the point of my brush pointing towards the bulb of the flower where it would be connected to the stem to make sure all of these petals are pointing back to that stem. And then I've got petals behind that are falling in, fluffies. There's part of my shape, and then I'm going to add another row of petals, just the tops of the petals poking out back here. So they're just kind of fat C curves. Might want to darken these middle petals to make this look a little more dense and layered. Teardrop petals falling away from the center of the flower. Then I'll go back in and with wet and wet kind of poke in some darker color. So there's my first peony. So already right now I know this is pointing me up. So I'm gonna curve this way. If I was over here, it was pointing that way, I would curve that way. So I'm not gonna have my high moment over here because this is just kind of leading me this way. Because I don't know, it just feels that way, right?
Gut.
But I also just don't wanna create a line right here. Like this is a very big moment. So I'm just gonna have a lighter, less full moment, like some buds or leaves happening up here. But first I'm gonna do my second flower, my second peony. I don't wanna do the same pink. I think what I'm gonna do now is a version of this pink, but with some more orange in it. So it's got that soft tone to it, but it's not the same super pastel light pink. So then for this moment, I'm zigging, zagging. I'm not directly beneath it or directly on top of it with this next peony. I'm off and down to the right, but I don't want it to be the same size moment happening. I definitely want this to be the biggest. So this is gonna be more of a bud. And it's falling this way, so I'm pulling towards me for these teardrops. Maybe leaving this white space right here for the stamen. I'm going to use a dry brush to soak this up right here so it doesn't create a hard line. And maybe one petal falling away right here. Like so. Now that I'm seeing this bud, I want another one right here to create that zigzag. So we're going to do basically the same thing, but pointing this way up to this corner. There we go. There's my starting point. So I usually do about 2 or 3 of my biggest flowers first. And then I know, okay, we've got a chunk or like a triangle of white space here, chunk here, and chunk here. Those are my curves that I have to work with, but I need to keep in mind that I'm doing a C curve or an S curve. So I'm probably not going to put anything, if I do, it's really minimal over here because then that would extend the curve this way and we're going like this and not like this or that. So I'm going to do minimal stuff here because I want my highest point, whoopsie, my highest point to be this direction, my lowest point to be over here. So I'm not going to go too high over here, not going to go too low down here. It's going to be these corners that I'm leading people through. So next, what is just most natural in terms of where to put things and what, I usually end up going with my stems and leaves and then some filigree moments. So I've got my chartreuse color, beautiful against this peach because there's an orange undertone in this flower. And then obviously we've got a green undertone in this yellow-green. So those are beautiful. Incorporating some very subtle ways of contrasting orange and blue through the green we mixed up with cobalt turquoise. And this having pink in it, or red. An orangey undertone. So I'm just going to lay down some brighter stems and leaves first. When you think about holding a bouquet of flowers, let's pretend my hand is like right here holding this. We wouldn't have a stem that's on this flower pointing this way, because that would mean that somebody's holding this flower over here. So we're pointing this way instead of that way. So we're going to curve like that to that flower. And maybe I have a stem of leaves coming out that way. We'll finish that off once I get more down. And then this guy, we're going to have come through here. And we'll add a pouring leaf, or like a waterfall of leaves coming out this way to lead to this corner. And to ground that bright chartreuse, let's grab the agave color. I want some white, actually. Let's grab that agave color that I've mixed up, touch more cobalt, and use that for some of these stems and leaves too. Really nice color against these softer pinks. So one of my favorite floral bits to paint with this smoky agave color is eucalyptus. And I think it's gonna look really nice with this pink color. So I'm gonna start to lead people's eyes up with an S curve of eucalyptus. So I'm gonna do this teardrop shape that I just kind of loop down to make a disc. So pressing and looping down. And then imagining where the stem of this eucalyptus is going, kind of pointing this direction and leading people up. Maybe a little more blue for these next couple ones. Just a little bit there. And then we'll start pulling people down. So referencing this eucalyptus down here as well. But I'm gonna pull out some darker blue. The cobalt and white gouache mixture for some Lily of the Nile almond-shaped petals. So we're just going to bloop and drag and create a V shape with these almond-shaped petals. So they're not all the same hue and value of almond-shaped petals. like so. Let's put one up here. Zigzag, zigzag. Because we need to now let's think about tipping point. So this is another thing with composition. We have pretty even weight distributed from these opposing corners. And so I want to bring it a little bit further down here so it's not stretched so diagonally in a perfect line. But along with that, you want to think about tipping points. So this empty space or white space up here feels really heavy compared to how much we have down here. So it's weighted on that side. So the balance would be a little bit leaning on this top left corner versus up here. So that is just a little lesson from my photography days of how you want to balance your images, and it works for paintings as well when you're doing full floral pieces like this. And then we'll get higher with some other elements up there. Let's bring in the third, just a peak, not a full lily of the Nile or agapanthus, whoopsie. Right here, maybe it's just a couple poking out, and the rest of it is behind this flower. Let's get higher up with this one actually. And then that chartreuse color. It's falling from the center point here. Just kind of lead little stems connecting to these petals or buds, whatever. Now we need to ground this piece with color. We need it to, it feels very soft right now, and our color palette has these bright red oranges. So I'm going to come up here with this red orange. Orange and blue are contrasting colors. So just notice how this orange and red orange make that blue just kind of pop. It brings a whole new vibe. I'm just painting teardrop shapes for buds, and then I'm gonna bring in one over here. And in here. This is still our highest point on the top half of the sheet, but we want to go a little bit higher so it's not too much competition for the left side. Now we want to bring it down here, but not in a direct line. So I'm going to come closer to center. And now we can fill in with our canary yellow. Some of this X shape that we have going on. So we're gonna come over here in this white space, fill in this white space with some berries. So just using the side of my brush, I'm gonna just create this fluffy texture, laying down more saturated color first and then lightening it with water, coming in and maybe like a little agapanthus shape where it's a taper little spear. So currently I'm filling out what was creating an X shape on my paper so that it's a little bit more rounded and flowy. And we're just creating the S curve with our brighter moments on the page. So we're gonna have this yellow kind of be our gap filler. But making sure we still have gaps of white space throughout our page. We can kind of create this, like we're kind of creating a background effect with this yellow berry agapanthus look. Might go back on top of some of these yellows and add some yellow ochre to create more depth. And then we're going to, I didn't have this color in my reference photo, but this is where you just kind of let your eye direct things. So I'm grabbing sap green. I want to really add something with weight to balance out the bright reddish orange. So I'm grabbing sap green and a touch of lemon yellow deep. I'm going to use this darker green color to fill in some more of these white space and just kind of frame some of these lighter flowers. Making sure to stay small over here because this is our lowest and highest points. Filling in that white space with the curved leaf that's still pointing to my highest point over here. That's going to be my higher leaf. And now our final touch, we can do some stamen on these peonies. Grabbing a lot of lemon yellow deep, touch of yellow ochre, and a touch of white gouache. And I'm going to add some dots up here in this white space. Still leaving some white space so it looks like, okay, that's the middle of the flower. And then up here. And one more leaf. And there you go. So again, this is a super dense piece, but you start with your main big stems. Just think of it like you're creating a centerpiece or a floral bouquet for a wedding or something. You're starting with your biggest pieces first to take up the most white space so you can really feel out the direction. But with those big pieces, you're keeping in mind where you want your highest point to be and your lowest point to be. And the highest and lowest point should be opposing corners because, again, thinking about balance and tipping point on a sheet of paper or in a photograph, composition-wise, you don't want it to feel weighted too heavy on the top or too heavy on the bottom. So we're opposing corners so that they're evenly weighted on the top and the bottom so that their tipping point isn't too top or bottom heavy. And we're grabbing that or creating balance with that with focal points like brighter colors or contrasting moments between blue and orange or any other contrasting colors that you might be using in your piece. And we're also leading people's eyes up through that tipping point or opposing corners through zigzag or C-curve. So these 3 peonies right here are our biggest moments, and they are in a zigzag pointing up towards that tipping point in the top corner. And then we have a long stem of agapanthus and other elements down here pulling it, people's eyes down to this corner. So think about your overall shape, S-curve or C-curve through those tipping points, and how you're going to lead people's eyes there. And then placing your biggest elements first, and then plugging in the stems and leaves and your other filler flowers. I hope that was helpful for you. If you are just itching to paint all the watercolor flowers and want all of the helpful resources from my channel, I've got some things for you. First of all, the 5 principles to watercolor flowers. That is a must watch. I teach you the 5 things you must know before painting any watercolor flower. Check it out, we'll link it here. And also 10 easy watercolor flowers is an amazing video where I show you 10 different types of flowers. So if you want something beyond what I showed in this course or in this lesson today, make sure you check out that video. And then also check out my watercolor flower playlist on my channel. So we'll link all of those in the description below. And I also have a book on watercolor flowers called Everyday Watercolor Flowers. And make sure you check it out. It's on Amazon and in local bookstores like Barnes & Noble and libraries and smaller ones. The Amazon link will be below. And I also have a Patreon channel where I dive into more floral watercolor stuff, some landscape stuff. So check that out. You can pay as little as $2 a month for ad-free videos. So if you don't like the ads that come about on the YouTubes, you can spend $2 a month on Patreon and you'll get all of our videos ad-free, and then you can pay a little extra for exclusive tutorials that we only show on my Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. As always, any like, comment, or subscribe means the world to us. It gets these videos on more screens and in other people's eyeballs, so make sure you like this video, comment below if this was helpful or what your favorite part of the video was, and I will see you in the next video.